Hello? Is anybody there? Okay, calm down, Micah, calm down. There's no such thing as ghosts. There is no such thing as ghosts. There is no such thing as ghosts. Right? You might be surprised to know that the Bible actually talks about ghosts. But what exactly does it say? Are these lingering souls with unfinished business? Are they some other mischievous spirits bent on scaring you to death? Is Grandma showing up to bring you some comfort from the great beyond? Biblical Hebrew actually has a ton of words related to the spirit realm, and many of the words for the various spiritual entities also relate to the people who interact with them. Itim means both ghosts and those who contact ghosts. Yedei means a knowing spirit and also the person that conjures that spirit. Ob means a spiritual entity and also the bottle that someone traps that entity in. So many times when you read through the Bible and it talks about various spirits or ghosts, it might not be referring to actual entities, but those who made a business of spiritual practices. Just as a street magician is one who performs magic tricks, their title doesn't do anything to prove that their magic is always legitimate.
Cool.
Of course, there are times where some bizarre things happen in Scripture that seem to be speaking of certain supernatural events that might give us pause. Saul and the medium, the disciples see Jesus and proclaim he's a ghost, the transfiguration and appearances of Moses and Elijah. But are they real? Well, God forbids his people from going anywhere near anything that has to do with contacting the spirit world. So clearly, these things aren't nothing. But we need to keep a few things in mind. First, of course, Christianity is a religion that cannot and should not exclude the supernatural. There is a spirit world, and it is complex and mysterious to us. Sometimes we're a little bit too comfortable with the simple classifications of angels and demons, but the Bible makes it pretty clear that there is a huge variety of spiritual beings, both in role and function, as well as appearance for us to consider. In fact, when Saul approaches the medium to conjure up Samuel for him, the word she uses to describe what she sees isn't ghost or spirit, it's Elohim, which means divine beings. She also seems pretty surprised that something actually showed up at all, so either she's not very good at contacting the dead or this wasn't the dead. The second thing we need to keep in mind is that just because we read accounts in the Bible where people believed ghosts to be real, doesn't mean that each account proves the existence of dead spirits haunting the earth. This could be a wrong application of a definition or just mistaken identity. A prime example of this is Jesus appearing to his disciples walking on the water. They cry out in fear that they've seen a ghost, but as the story progresses, it becomes very obvious that this isn't true. The third thing we need to keep in mind is that we can't read our bias into Scripture. During the Transfiguration account, many might like to take their belief that disembodied spirits are floating around the earth and plug it in right there. However, there's reason to wonder whether the appearance of Moses and Elijah might have been part of a vision from God granted to the disciples. Honestly, anytime we see vision language in the Bible, the authors don't often bother to clarify. When it comes to dead relatives floating around and haunting our houses, there is something really important we can know to be true. God is not powerless over the dead. In 1 Samuel 2, verse 6, God decides who dies and who lives. He gives life and he takes it away and has oversight over everything in creation. If a medium tries to call up dead spirits, it isn't as if suddenly God loses control of what goes on in the world, spirit or not. From this reality, we can draw a few conclusions. Either the Bible's ghosts are really the dead people coming up and God is allowing it to happen, or they're not what they seem.
Dr. Najib!
In the example of the disciples believing Jesus to be a ghost, it was mistaken identity and human error. In the example of the Transfiguration, Jesus seems to call this a vision, but even if it were the actual spirits of Elijah and Moses, God's the one doing it. And in the example of Saul visiting the medium, it seems like both things are true. God is very much in control of sending Saul a message, but it's also not a ghost or a dead spirit called up by the medium herself. When God condemns trying to communicate with spirits, he says that it's a matter of loyalty. And this is something we should pay attention to. These aren't just practices that bother him, they're practices that lead people away from God. He doesn't just say, "Don't do this because I say so." He says, "Don't do it because if you're following after evil spirits, you're not following after me." Maybe you haven't thought of it this way, but these mysterious occult practices are forms of worship, and God will not abide his people worshiping anyone but himself. These mediums and diviners are definitely interacting with something. We know they can't be interacting with the dead because God has oversight over that. So what or who are they contacting? The fact that God treats these practices as a battleground for your loyalty should make it clear. They're contacting unclean spirits who are trying to draw you away from God and his truth, and towards themselves using deception. These are God's enemies, and they should be yours too. The bottom line is, if you're faced with some sort of supernatural interaction or encounter, don't dismiss it as not real because it very well might be. These things are nothing to mess around with, but don't entertain it as something potentially positive either. You shouldn't seek comfort in the fact that you think your dead uncle's come back from death to say goodbye to you. He hasn't. But as frightening as these spirits might be, don't let them rattle you either. God is in control of all, the living, the dead, the angelic hosts, and the unclean spirits. What he asks of you is not to follow after them, but to follow after him. Thanks for watching Magnified. If you found our content helpful, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We really appreciate your support.